till you let you see. Used to let me see me. Shake till you let show, but I can't let it go. I'm holding on. Well, time goes by. I keep holding on, but I can't let it show. So hard, I tried for so long. So hard, I cried for so long. Shake till you let you see. You still have peace with me. Shake till you let it show, but I can't let it go. 'Cause I'm holding on. I'm holding
Biting my lip not to say your name. Tighten my grip, but it stays the same, and it's over. You're telling me it's over. I'm holding my mouth not to scream and shout. I'm clenching my fists so I don't resist, and it's over. You're telling me it's over. No other way that you was like, baby, don't lie to me. If you forget me in the way, then forget about me. I can't stand you for so long. Why don't you see it? That you're a liar. Hearts in pieces, my words on fire. I wanna run, I wanna run away from your love, away from your love. If you don't like what it feels like, then you don't lie to me. I'm on my way, but if you change, you can come back to me. But please don't lie to me. But please don't lie to me. It's not okay like this. Yeah. If you don't like what it feels like, then you don't lie to me. I'm on my way, but if you change, you can come back to me. But please don't lie to me. But please don't lie to me. It's not okay like this. Why don't you see it? That you're a liar. Hearts in pieces, my words on fire. I wanna run, I wanna run away from your love, away from your love.
my heart. You should know that in dedicated. It's for you, something morning. That gives it you. Already lose what I'm feeling in my heart. You know that I'm still loving and I'm here for you. Giving all my love, will you give it to? And I ain't singing I just singing You know that I'm still loving and I'm here for you. Giving all my love, will you give it to? And I ain't singing I just singing
Hola, hola. Hola.
Hello, hello, hello. In a few minutes,
Those of you who will need simultaneous translation, there will be bits in Spanish and then in English, and then we'll switch. It will be anarchic. So if you can't speak both languages, I recommend that you pick one of these outside. If you can't speak both Spanish and English, get yourself one of these as we'll go back and forth between the two languages. So whoever is not wearing headphones will assume he or she can speak both languages. Durante las palabras de Marcos, ¿nos quedamos sentados? ¿Nos venimos para acá? Ah, bueno. I welcome all the panelists. Yeah, take a seat. Paul. Hi. Great to meet you. Hi, Henry. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I want to wear this proudly. Thank you. Vamos a comentar los penales contra Colombia en la Copa América. La tanda de Dibu. Vamos a hacer un análisis penal por penal. El de Jerry Mina en particular, lo traje en video para pasarlo ahí. No problem. Henry Anderson. You're from Leeds. Muy bien. We're all here. Great to see all of you. We're gonna start. Welcome to this conversation. I hope everyone joins the conversation. I don't know if to use English as the main language or Spanish, but we'll exchange. Welcome to this dialogue between, I would say, the impact investment community of Latin America, part of it represented today here by Amy and Maria Elvira and many of the other distinguished panelists as well, and the world of public banks, development banks, some multilaterals. So we'll see where we meet in the middle, and we'll try to make this as informal and interactive as possible. To kick us off, and before I go to all the panelists and I interact with them and I present them, we have the pleasure of receiving some introductory remarks from a dear friend and someone who knows a lot about this and works globally. We are lucky to have him as a fellow Latin American, now based in New York for quite a few years, Marcos Neto, Director of the Sustainable Finance Hub of the United Nations Development Programs. So Marcos, kick us off and put us in context and inspire us, and then we'll take it from there with the panel.
That's kind of a responsibility. To the inspiring part, I don't know about it. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me first thank you, the NAB, the National Advisory Board from Colombia, and all of the GSG friends. We've been working together for many years in this aspect. And I do think this is an interesting conversation because, one of the things we hear a lot is this issue of blended and how you bring it, public money, private money. But the question is, in the end, whatever money you bring it, what is the impact? And I think that is the crossroads that we are all in, trying to understand and trying to figure out how you leverage more private capital using it smartly, philanthropic and everything, and public, but for genuine impact. Now, where are we in this whole conversation, right? And where are we as the United Nations Development Program doing in that sense? And perhaps I will frame it around three major buckets. One is, if you look at the PDBs, is how do we enhance the funding efficiency and impact? Second, from how do we steer the private sector finance by effective risk sharing and risk mitigation? And three, how do we increase accountability and transparency to shareholders and stakeholders? If you pick all asset classes, there's an estimate of 44% in loans is needed for serving climate finance investment in the real economy. Now, that's a first funny thing. I always find it in finance conversations, George, you can talk about this later, the funny aspect of there is a real economy and then there is what? What is the financing economy? Unreal? Imaginary? Right? So how do we actually bring those two things together towards this real economy, which is where we live as individuals, right? PDB loans are indispensable because they can be long-term at interest rate close to the rates paid by developed countries, but we need to put PDB's balance sheets to optimal use. And I think we're going to hear a lot about this today in the global conversation on the reforming the World Bank Evolution Roadmap and the Capital Adequacy Framework. How do we take that agenda to the PDBs to put the balance sheets, the huge numbers that I've been talking about, to better use? Now, globally, multiple opportunities are being shaped to support the PDBs and the DFIs, as well as public and private sectors to access consistent information and make reasoned decisions on where and how to channel investments for positive social impact. So I'd like to discuss the progress that has been made this year within the G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group under the Indian Presidents, which is co-chaired by the United States and China. We at UNDP play the role of the Secretariat on this working group, and other related organizations on scaling up the adoption of social impact instruments. Through this journey, the SFWG identifies significant challenges. One of the key hurdles that the working group identify is the absence of a shared understanding when it comes to defining and comprehending social impact concepts. This lack of a common foundation has posed difficulty in aligning our efforts effectively. Our measurement and reporting frameworks have also been fragmented, which has hindered the consistency and comparability of results. In light of these considerations, the Sustainable Finance Working Group has put forth a series of recommendations for social impact investment. Firstly, it's imperative that we provide unwavering support for the development of a robust pipeline of impact-driven projects that are not only investment ready, but also come with well-crafted financing solutions. Second, innovation should be actively fostered in the realm of social impact instruments and investment opportunities. Embracing new ideas and approaches will propel us forward. Thirdly, we must enhance the interoperability and credibility of voluntary impact measurements and management frameworks. This will ensure that we are actually capturing and reporting the social outcomes we aim to achieve. This needs to be supported by a robust financial and regulatory architecture for impact investment, where UNDP impact measurement and management services is at your disposal. Right? We've been working in advancing the standards to provide impact measurement and management services, or what we call IMM, to help integrate sustainability and the SDGs into business and investment purpose, management systems and decision making through these services. PDBs can enhance their performance on sustainability and positive contribution to achieve the SDGs, as well as the integrity of business and investment practices around claims that investment advance the SDGs. We launched with OECD a few years back a set of impact standards for financing sustainable development, which were developed to provide a framework for donors, development finance institutions, and PDBs and private sector partners to incorporate impact relevant to the SDGs that are often ignored in the measurement of investment projects. You've seen a progress that's going on around the Task Force for Climate Financial Disclosure, which has now been absorbed with the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standard Board. On September 18th, the framework for the nature financial disclosure is going to be released at Climate Week in New York, the TNFD. What happened to the social issues? So you've got the climate, you've got the biodiversity. What is the social? Not that social are in competition with climate and biodiversity. You cannot fight poverty anymore without tackling climate. That, let's not find ourselves back in the 90s with the fights between, environment and social issues. But it is important that in this conversation of systemic risk, we actually elevate the social issues, which have become a little bit forgotten, right, as we push for climate and now for biodiversity. So we at UNDP have joined forces with a series of organizations to create what is now called the Task Force on Inequality and Social-Related Financial Disclosures. So we are starting the process, following to some degree the processes that TCFD and TNFD has followed, to come back and elevate, right, issues of inequality, the systemic issues to the financial systems of inequality, and the social aspects. Let's see how is this going to end up. But it's an attempt to do justice to the concept of sustainable development and to the SDGs. Economy, environment, and social, equally. Now that's where we go back to 1987. Some of us are young enough to not remember this, but I'm old enough to remember this. You go back to the Brundtland Report in 1987, who defined sustainable development, and that's the essence of the Sustainable Development Goals. So we think it is important to, bring back, through this. I'm not going to try to pronounce the acronym, this Task Force of Inequality and Social Financial Disclosure, and that's the next wave in that sense. Now, this is all very important because one of the biggest problems we're having in the world today is the risk of washing. Now, you can choose the color. It can be green, it can be blue, it can be multicolor, but the whole issue of washing is creating a risk that the ones that are doing the right things all get thrown out with the notion that this is not real, this is not serious, right? And I think we've seen this going on with ESG, the whole ESG industry now under attack from the left, under attack from the right, right? And in retreat, right? So how do we make sure that this doesn't happen when it comes down to impact? As a matter of fact, I would argue that the answer to the problems of ESG industry now is impact. Get away from ESG, embrace impact, transform from what it was into an SDG alignment, and maybe we can manage these issues of wash, but that is another major hurdle to the mainstreaming of the conversation that we're having here. Now, there's also a conversation of standardization and harmonization. You know, Paul and I were in our lunch today, and there was the whole conversation about, you know, taxonomies. There are too many different taxonomies. We are getting ourselves in trouble. Yes, I understand from an investor and from a PDB, the notion that you have one harmonized system around the world would be very good. Sorry, colleagues, it's impossible. You cannot get the European Union taxonomy and put it in Colombia, right? You know, Colombia needs a taxonomy that is contextualized to Colombia. And so does Zambia, and so does whoever the country who chooses to have a taxonomy, because some countries are choosing not to have a taxonomy, right? The question then becomes, you also cannot have a fruit salad. That's part of the wash. So the question becomes, can you have well-designed, contextually relevant taxonomies or other instruments that are able to communicate with each other around the world? So the magic word is interoperability. So the G20 in 2021, out of the Italian presidents, come up with 6 principles for interoperable, how to design interoperable instruments. And we did it with the World Bank and others. We just finished a process of a Latin America common framework taxonomy. So the region is the first region in the world that has applied the G20 principles, has created a taxonomy framework for the region, which now comes down to national and subnational level, which is interoperable to the Chinese taxonomy, to the European Union taxonomy. And that is how we're going to have to reconcile the desire for harmonization around the world with the need to contextualize in real economy in rich countries, which are very, very different in capacity aspect. We need to bring more private finance. We all know that, right? Now, why doesn't the private sector finance? You know, GFAN came out of Glasgow, $100 trillion, right? What happened since then? We all know what's the issue. The issue is risk. As a colleague from Africa mentioned at lunch today, the perception of risks of Africa. We at UNDP done a research recently in which we calculated that the misperception that the credit rate agencies do in Africa costs $75 billion a year in cost of capital to Africa. By the way, 3 companies, which were not elected by anyone, on a very murky methodology, decided to manage risk. $75 billion is the cost of capital, extra cost of capital, because of how these people price risk. Now, going forward, I think it will be very important the role the PDBs play with the impact community in terms of mitigating risk. We at UNDP, we're not a financial institution, we try to mitigate risk through policy, right? You know, renewable energy sector, we come and help figure out the best policy way, contractual in all aspects. And there is a real value, right, in lowering risk through policy, but it's not enough. So we need to start finding financing risk-sharing mechanisms. We have some. The World Bank has MIGA, which does a very good leveraging, but it doesn't do a large enough volume, right? So I think next frontier here is how do you starting to find the risks mechanism necessary? One of the things we are exploring, we're doing a research with the Open Society Foundation, I don't know if the colleagues are here, they should be in Cartagena, on how do you bring guarantee instruments to thematic sovereign bonds. Why to bonds? Because that is an instrument that taps into the largest pool of capital in the world, which is assets under management. A lot of that money goes into bonds. Can we create a SDG bond or a green bond or a blue bond that has a better rating than the sovereign of the country? If we do that, by putting a guarantee or anything else behind, you are going to unlock at a lower cost of capital the money for the agenda that we're trying to do in terms of generating impact. It has been done once only in history. Only once a World Bank bond had a better rating than a sovereign bond. Let's see if we can do this. Happy to play around with all of this. Just to finalize, I think for us, going forward, you have to be able to find a way that you bring the private capital, that you make use of the standards that are going on as a way to try to minimize the risk of wash, right? But you also have to bring forward a profound push to help companies of all sizes and to help PDBs really measure impact. It is not easy to measure impact. And to measure impact in a way that not only demonstrated the positive that banks and companies are doing to their balance sheet by taking serious climate or biodiversity and inequality, hopefully, but also, and that is perhaps the last debate that I leave it for you as you go through, which is the biggest hot debate about materiality. Can you genuinely manage impact if you stay on a single materiality? Or do you actually have to do a double materiality exercise? In other words, not only what climate does the balance sheet of companies, but what companies do to climate and all the other aspects. If we are able to simplify that equation and help people create the data and able to report and to disclose on that aspect, plus de-risking, I do think we are able to unlock the financing that we needed to the impact that we're seeking. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcos. Gracias. Look, I will take the chance to welcome everyone who joined during Marcos's keynote, and I will introduce Maria Elvira. You didn't tell me. I will introduce the session formally. Absolutely, absolutely. No, please. Look, we'll try to make this, and everything I had in my head, I changed after listening to Marcos, or I gave bits of color, which is, sometimes, I don't know if it happens to you, you participate in panels and you go to panels and people say, can you send me the questions? So people know exactly what the question is, question 1, question 2. And I said to these folks, no questions. No nothing. We have no idea what we're going to talk about. So we invited Marcos to give us an agenda. So thank you, Marcos. Job done. So now I kind of know what we will talk about. I have no idea what everyone will say. And that's the beauty of human interaction, right? Otherwise, we will be replaced by a cone with an artificial intelligence software, and it's the same. So, no, yeah, he might come. And the cone will look better than me and will be better behaved, of course, the cone. But, thank you to Finance in Common for giving us this space. I see Jimena there. Jimena, so nice to put a face on you. You were a Zoom image to me all this year, and now you're here, personalized. So thank you, Jimena, and the team. I'm Sebastián Walisieco. I'm here this week representing the Global Steering Group on Impact Investment. It's a market builder that advances the impact investment ecosystem across the world, now with presence in 39 countries. I'm super delighted to be here with our members of Colombia and of Peru. You're wearing a few hats, Amy. And across the conference, I will try to mix two things. Things I heard back in the day, I think we heard from Marcos just now, and then throw it out there to have a conversation. There is the explicit or implicit acknowledgement that the agenda that we have ahead of us, we're not doing great, and that we are going backwards in many of the SDGs. In Latin America in particular, I think we are at the verge of not complying with 12 or 13 of the 17. The panorama is looking awful. We see the events, inequality is palpable, climate change, and so on. In Latin America alone, the latest figure I've seen is that we have a financing gap of at least $650 billion per year to meet the SDGs. And we know that no government alone will have the ability to finance that. Take all the public budgets of all the governments around the world. put them between brackets, sum them all together, and multiply times 100, it's not enough. So evidently, more capital, diverse capital, different sources. Marcos talked about blended, philanthropic, and especially private investment capital that today we will call impact capital, that seeks to make a positive impact with integrity, and measuring that impact with integrity will have to play a role. And if we fail on that, well, I fear that the world will be an uglier place to inhabit, even uglier than what it is today. So we got these crowds together in the understanding that public development banks and multilaterals more generally, and the impact community in each country has a role to play. And what they've been hearing, and what we've been hearing, is that, well, there is lack of coordination. So I hear the investors complaining that the development banks should be doing this and that for them to finally unlock their capital. And then I hear the investors or the public development banks or the multilaterals saying, well, the domestic capital should be doing this and that before achieving. And there we are, kind of stagnated. And for example, out of Latin America and out of emerging markets, capital is flowing out, not in. And you see more domestic savings going out of where capital is needed the most. So something is kind of wrong. Hopefully today we reflect about that and we come out with a few ideas for action. And Marcos started talking about challenges on disclosure, on taxonomy, the challenges of interoperability that has to do as a crucial enable of what I would call today integrity, or what he holds today to avoid the washing. And I wrote down 3-4 things. He said the issue is risk, financing risk mechanisms. He talked about guarantee instruments for sovereign, sustainable, green, social, SDG bonds, and a push for public development banks to measure impact. So what I would want to ask today to everyone, there is one single question, is how can you guys, or how can we collaborate better? Why aren't we mobilizing more capital? Why is capital flowing out of where we need it the most? Is it a matter of models, cases, instruments? And each of you will come from a different angle, and we'll see where we go. I would like, and I love the fact that I know a few of you, and many, it's the first time I see you in my life, so I'm very happy to be here with you today. So let's start with Henry Anderson, CEO of the Development Finance Corporation of Belize. And Henry, I want to thank you. Henry gave me the most beautiful pin here. So Henry, I will wear it, and for these 2 days, I will be a fellow Belize brother of you. There in the corporation, from what I've read, you deploy capital in support of SMEs, education, renewables, energy efficiency, and from what I've read, you get your funding mostly from regional or international cooperation. You, sitting where you are, how do you, or do you work to, how do you leverage more private capital? And how you deploy your own capital to leverage?
Okay, what I want to do is to, because we don't often get a stage like this to talk about a country or a DFI the size that we are. Mm-hmm. So I will give a context, and then I will answer the question. Please. I will touch on 3 things, right? I'll share the context of Belize, which is proxy for the Caribbean. I will touch on the opportunities that exist to reach impact investment and to bring more private capital in. And then I'll give some recommendations from our vantage point, what we would like to see, right? For us, since COVID-19, it's like living in a sci-fi movie. And the things that you wouldn't think would happen, you actually see happening, and it's real. And while you're going through that, there's a lot of discussion about, some of how we measure this, how we measure that, but we're feeling the impact of climate change every day. So let's start with the first one. Belize, I guess you guys may know, we're on the eastern coast of Central America, just below Mexico. We're the western end of the Caribbean, so we're both sides. We like to term Belize the jewel of the Caribbean, or the land of the free. And why we call it the jewel is because although we're a very tiny little country, we have the world's largest living barrier reef, or the second largest to Australia. Mm-hmm. We have some of the largest atolls, the largest cave. We have great flora and fauna. Okay, so we have a lot of things going on. Our population is approximately 400,000, so we're a relatively rare species in the global context of things. In terms of climate change and vulnerability, we rank number 8, all right? And the effects of climate change are not limited to sea level rise, erosion, hurricanes, extreme flooding, and severe drought.
So sorry, the 8th country most at risk in the whole world?
In the whole world, of I think like 173 is on the list, right? So this leads to significant impact and damage to homes, to infrastructure, to agriculture, tourism, and it also poses threats to human lives and obviously our economy. Belize is known as a leader in conservation. We have 60% of our forests, which covers about 36% of our terrestrial surface area in protected areas. We also have a total of 20% of our blue, or ocean space, also protected. So we are working, right? Post-COVID-19, we have seen our economy rebound. With the issuance of a blue bond and other fiscal measures, we have been able to reduce our debt to GDP ratio from 133% to 60.8%. We have reduced unemployment from upwards of 30% to 2.8%. Currently, we are working what will be a first in the world project for finance for permanence, a PFP, and that should get launched by the end of next year. We're working with the WWF on that. So we're doing a lot of work in terms of meeting our contributions. Now, in terms of 2030, we need an estimated US dollars 318 million as at 2021 for adaptation measures. For mitigation measures, as at 2021, we needed $1.3 billion. So in total, from 2021 to get to 2030, we need US 1.71 billion. Now that's a big number for us, but in other places, they maybe wrong the balance sheet to less than that, right? Currently,
the mistake in the risk calculation that Marco was talking about.
Right. Currently, 1.4 billion is where we are. Now, in terms of what are the opportunities, we see opportunities for inclusion. So, for example, we're here talking about, you know, the work that the GSG has been doing, but the national advisory boards doesn't apply to Belize, right? We are in Central America, but the board for Central America does not include Belize. And there's not a board for the Caribbean, which is one of the most vulnerable areas. Yep. So there's an opportunity to expand, to include us in that conversation, right? We need to develop our financial system. Some of the things Marcus was talking about. For us, our financial system is too immature. I like to joke that it's premature, right? We do not have the tools and the products to be able to take the private capital and de-risk it to get it into the public space. So in our little economy, we have about $700 million of liquidity that's not moving, but we do not have the guarantees enhancement products, for example, to be able to de-risk a project and transfer that capital into public development.
So wait, if I'm hearing you correctly, say country with loads of challenges, 400,000 people, and by taxation to those inhabitants, you will never bridge the gap of 1.4 billion. So if you say, here are the top 3 things we should do to reform our system or in collaboration or regionally to unlock more capital, what would you pick?
Okay, so what we want to see, and I'll give you one and I'll come to that. So we want to, another opportunity is to leverage knowledge in the region by real-time collaboration with the public development banks, with the universities, because you need to create knowledge. Now, what we want to see disruption, we want to see innovation, right? We want to see the development of regional digital platforms with AI, with machine learning, that allows the larger DFIs in the region with investment grade ratings to get engaged with us, okay? Those DFIs could be essential for converting high perceived risk financial instruments by our states to investment grade instruments. The DFIs can participate via credit enhancements like credit guarantees, political risk insurance, even equity participation or first in last out participation, to name a few. Now these are things that exist, but in our reality they haven't reached us yet, even to this day.
Why?
Because we do not have financial markets, all right? Because we're too small, nobody's paying any attention to us. It's like you don't exist. We get monies for MSMEs, and that's pretty much it. Even not realizing that our economies need to grow beyond MSMEs. And the MSMEs are not what is defined on a regional basis, but what's defined for us. So, for example, in Belize, an MSME is a company that sells $2 million US per year. So my institution cannot finance any company that sells more than that. So that's something that needs to change, and we're looking at that. But when it comes from the multilaterals that we borrow from, we also need for them to understand that, yes, MSMEs are important, but in our context, we need to look at what we call big firms, because those are like anchor firms in a value chain that are able to bring the other firms into the export market, and that's where we need to go. We need the domestic DFIs, or in the beneficiaries companies in the context that I just said. We can play an on-the-ground role in terms of adjudication if that's needed, monitoring and continuous evaluation or assessment, and we can do that with the larger ones. So we can serve as the eyes and ears to sort of bring credit in. Philanthropists can play a similar role in providing credit enhancements, and both can be contributed in exchange for policy commitments that align with resiliency paths that benefits all parties in the long run. So if you look at the Blue Bond, for example, that tied into certain policies that we adopted to ensure that the portion of the ocean that we put up to secure that bond is in line with what everybody wants to see. With the PFP we're doing, it's a similar thing. So we're putting policies that's aligned with 2030 or 2050, and that's what we're contributing.
So you're issuing instruments that link the performance, the financial performance of the instrument to the achievement of pre-agreed, in this case, biodiversity or natural outcomes.
Yes, yes.
Well, that's impact investment, and that's very good to hear.
And I think the Seychelles did in 2016, and we were the biggest one in 2022. All right, that was with the help of the Nature Conservancy, and the US DFC provided the security to allow the guarantee to make it all happen.
In Marco's vision, an issuance like that should have or could have, would have lower risk than any other issuance. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's an example of what
Yeah,
you were talking
could
about. So we want to advocate to change the way the regional collaborations occur. We believe that maybe through a leader, if we have more collaboration with the public development banks, we can look at how to get deals done. But what we want to see is that we kill the bureaucracy, because climate change is already here. It's happening. We see it. So when you take 2-3 years to develop a project and another, or we have to get accredited first, let's say for GCF, that's like a 5-year process from the time you identify the gap until you get accredited. Then it takes maybe 2 to 3 years to develop a project, and maybe another 2 years to get it approved. That's a decade.
2030 is there. I mean, if you finish that, we are doing the 2030 new goals.
We're past that. So we need to just change how we do things. Most of our organizations are going through, let's say, digital transformation. That's not a linear process, right? That's more agile. So you change the way you work, you change the way you think. And what we use are objective OKRs, objectives with key results. Maybe if we adopt a more agile system like that, and we say, okay, this is what we will fix, and we take that methodology that is working in the software industry to how we plan things, maybe we can get to 2030 and achieve more, as opposed to this sort of waterfall approach that we take smack with bureaucracy, and what we're forgetting is the need for the impact. Right?
More collaboration, more exchange, a strong call to a leader. Let me stop you there and go now to Amy. Hi, Alan. Hola, Alan. Thank you for joining. Amy, we're going to talk in Spanish, right? Bueno, yo voy a hablar en argentino, que no es español. O sea, es...
I'm going to speak in Argentinian. This is not easy. Amy, you have a very interesting profile because you mix both hemispheres of the brain. You are chief development in the development bank in Peru, but at the same time you are part of the group of National Advisory Board in Peru of Investment Bank. How do you react regarding what Marcus was mentioning and Henry? What's happening in Peru? And my question, how can we do an unlocking of more capital?
No, no funcionó. Mis poderes telepáticos.
Ahí está.
Perfecto.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you, Maria Elvira, for your invitation. As you mentioned, wearing the two hats, COFIDE, Development Bank in Peru, but at the same time, I am part of the advisory board of NAM Peru that recently is part of the GSG. So, as you mentioned before, and regarding the question, 3 years ago, we had the opportunity as Development Bank to visit the NABs in Canada and Mexico with our colleagues in NAB Colombia. And I remember it neatly because at the time, they were at the moment where we are today. They wanted to institutionalize it, governance, and how could we attract all the stakeholders of this ecosystem of impact investment. That was our question back then. Our colleagues in NAB Colombia were mentioning at the time, how can we make this very representative? How can we effectively bring them to the table, the investors, the entrepreneurs, all the enablers of the ecosystem, and that we all together can talk in the same language? In fact, at the time, we had a vision and said it's not going to be feasible for COFIDE as Development Bank to be able to meet the objectives as we have as country in the Agenda 2030, because this will not be able to reach 2030. Imagine after the pandemic, Peru was one of the countries that was the hardest hit by the COVID-19, and the effect in education, in economic terms. Economically, we are not recovered yet at the levels of the pre-pandemic. We have an informality level that was 70% in the production structure. Now today, it's 80%. So 90% in our structure is a very small structure in SMEs. So we're talking about a country that many of you know, the political aspects is not really working in our favor. So in this context, a few weeks ago, which launched NAB, we confirmed that effectively this is a way of making, this is a way of aligning in order to improve the situation of our country. That's what we want, to improve the quality of life of the citizens in our country. So this is very romantic. It may seem romantic, but in fact, when we had these meetings with the advisory board and executive board of the NAB, you understand that only sitting at the table and having these tough conversations from the point of view of the challenges that the investors have, that COFIDE is a lot of investors. So it's a development bank who gives access to the finance through different instruments to the SMEs in our country. When we sit at the table, when the entrepreneurs, when the foundations, we all have different initiatives that maybe we didn't know. And sitting at the table, we can see that we can generate effectively a lot of synergy and add to the efforts that we're doing. And from COFIDE, we want to mobilize the capital, private capital of the investors, corporates, of the foundations, that it would be otherwise very difficult to bring them to the table.
Banco que tiene un mandato de desarrollo, ¿no? Y que está invirtiendo. ¿Se sienten solos en eso, acompañados? ¿Se está sumando el sector privado? ¿Qué hacen para que eso pase?
Sí, el sector privado está cada vez más concientizado en el Perú, pero como decía Marco, hay mucho miedo, ¿no?, de parte del inversor.
There's fear by private investors because of the risks implied in investing in entrepreneurships where they don't know how to use these impact measurement tools That's the issue here. I think there's a wish by private investors in Peru to effectively assess these types of asset class, but once they sit down with the entrepreneur, many times they don't know how to request or how to ask them to show the impact. And on the other hand, on the side of the entrepreneurs as well, we have so many social gaps in Peru and climate that we have entrepreneurs with many business ideas that are under development, but when they sit down with investors, they realize that they don't speak the same language. They don't know how to prove or how to show or quantify the impact they're generating. So there's two things that Marco mentioned there. One was risk, and the other is measuring impact by development banks. What have you thought about doing in coming months, next year, to mitigate this? At COFIDE, since last year, we began a very intense measurement of all interventions, especially, as I mentioned, as a result of the pandemic. Peru had an assistance program, a very strong program for businessmen, and we realized that many of our programs, being a development bank that's over 50 years old, did not measure its social and environmental impact. So we started doing this very strongly since last year, because this also allows the decision makers and those who design public policies to have the necessary information to manage the limited resources of the state. So this at NAB Peru is the first thing we're going to do. In fact, one of the first initiatives that we're starting at NAB Peru is to assess the different impact methodologies, the existing methodologies internationally, and see which could better adapt to the Peruvian market. Because like Marco said, we all have the will to find a single methodology that can be adapted perhaps to all the countries, but we realize this is not possible. It's impossible. I've come with so much hope and was told, no, it can't be. I believe you, it can't be done. Well, so what we want to do is precisely to ground these methodologies to reality, to the Peruvian market, and to effectively see which could better work for our investors and entrepreneurs. Since you're co-host, the good thing is you can choose between English and Spanish. The bad thing is that I'm going to ask you to be very brief. Maria Elvira, she's the executive director of GSG Colombia. You have all the others who say development banks should do this or that, otherwise we won't do this, or I need you to do the risking. What do you hear? You have investor, corporate, more philanthropic. You have foundations. You have bank. What are you hearing from this ecosystem in Colombia? Well, picking up a bit on everything that has been discussed in this panel and having all these people you mentioned at the NAB board, we have a significant representation in where we're analyzing what we're doing well and where we need to work more, is that we see there's a lot to be still done in Colombia, despite us being pioneers in many other subjects. And the fact that there still isn't a common understanding as to what is impact investment results in us having a very strong work to do to bring in those who are the laggards. And this is something we need to do better, and we need to do in a more powerful way, because people who are not in this game is because they have not understood fully what it is. So whereas we do see the issues we've always raised, and these issues that we need to know how to measure, we need to have something that's standardized to see where we are and how we can improve. And like Marco well said, with this saying that this is not possible, is to see how to quote-unquote tropicalize this and how it can better serve the culture, the degree of maturity of your country, to see what's better for you. All these issues that we know still need to be discussed. But there's something very important presently that's what's at our fingertips as NABs and listening to Amy is we truly need to make the best use of the fact that we're the Colombia chapter of an institution like GSG to be the articulator of the impact ecosystem that allows us to reach all those laggards in order to have better articulation and thus escalate and look at different ways where we can deploy and unlock the capital, like you said, especially beginning with that public politics incidents in Colombia using two milestones that we have before I got here, which is one paper that we structured thanks to your support, thanks to the support of the Canadian government, and under our leadership with FEDesarrollo, where very specific recommendations exist as to how to navigate this administration specifically to build the way and to eventually achieve the dream, which would be an umbrella with impact investment strategy, but achieving small steps, going step by step, but then having a cascading effect so that we can all advance towards the same goal. Does this point directly on development banks? Yes, development banks should, well, I believe this is the perfect opportunity for us to tell PDBs that we're the perfect ally to walk with them down their impact agendas, their fair transition agenda, articulators like them who can structure projects, financial vehicles that can be, well, with these innovative and disruptive characteristics we've mentioned, it's precisely the types of partners we need to advance. Thank you very much.
Paul, I won't torture you with my Argentinian Spanish, so I will speak my Argentinian English. Paul Botner is Director of Sustainable Finance, Industry and Diplomacy. Paul, this is a bracket. You will need to explain us what Director of Diplomacy means, but that's a side question. From the Bezos Earth Fund, impressive commitment of $10 billion, if I'm not wrong, the largest ever commitment made by a philanthropic institution, working on climate and nature-based solutions. From what I've been reading, I guess you make deployments in a catalytic way, looking to co-invest with others and to stimulate further mobilization of capital. So to you, the question would be, how does everything that we've resonated, because you're not a private investor in the sense that a commercial investor, and you're not a development finance institution per se. So the question to you, Paul, is what brings you to Cartagena first? I mean, why are you here? I mean, we are delighted to meet you here, but what brought you here specifically to this meeting? And how does everything that we've been discussing so far resonate with you and an institution like the one you are so closely engaged with?
Thank you. Can you hear me? So that's a great question, and I'm going to shed light on it by pointing out that just 4 months ago, I left BlackRock, where I was the global head of sustainable investing. So I'm going to try to address some of these issues also from the perspective of a private investor. From the point of view of a philanthropy, it's pretty simple, right? We may be the largest single philanthropic investor or grant maker in climate and nature, but it's still a finite amount of money. So everything that we do needs to be catalytic. And so we're all about impact, but there's an infinite need for capital expenditure in the world, in the energy transition, in protecting nature, and we can't just fund the first 10 billion of capital expenditure concessional finance that's needed. So when it comes to impact, we're looking for business models that try to, for example, demonstrate how maybe people didn't think that you could do project development, for example, using true equity, development equity. We know how to do it with grants, but actually maybe you can do it as a commercial model. So how can we demonstrate that? How can we help finance things that cannot be financed through commercial means? So that's the philanthropy side. That's the easy part. But I want to tell you just a little bit in a couple minutes what I learned from a couple of years at BlackRock on these issues. Because what was very interesting sitting on Wall Street and my background is in climate, and I worked in the U.S. government and in the nonprofit world, but was BlackRock has an impact investing part of its portfolio, but it's a, let's say, $9 trillion asset manager, world's largest. 600 billion of that is in sustainable funds, and a small share of that is in thematic funds that focus on promoting sustainable objectives, and a small part of that is what a Wall Street firm would call impact investing. Because in the private financial sector, impact investing has come to have a very narrow definition. And it's good. It's a rigorous definition, but it has to meet high bar for measurable, reported impact of social and environmental outcomes. But not everything that falls into the category of interesting sustainable investment is impact investment, according to these definitions. And so the problem that I would flag is that in the private finance dialogue, impact investing has, for well-intentioned reasons, been put into a very small box. And actually what we need is to appreciate the fact that a lot of investors want to do more with their money than just focus on risk-adjusted return. But not all of them are interested in what are called impact investing products. So there's a sort of gap here, right? And there is a big disconnect still between public finance institutions, and I used to work for, I've done that too, and private, right? So the public sector thinks of the private sector as some kind of a creature you have to lure out of a cave to do some work and then have it go back. And the feeling is mutual, right? Nobody on Wall Street wakes up wanting to do a deal with the World Bank that day. So we have to make sure that the way that even the language of PDBs when it comes to impact investing is not wandering away and completely separated from the definition of impact investing as a niche area as far as capital markets go. If you want more investors to be interested in impact investing, private investors, first, don't put it into a tiny box from a definitional point of view. And second, do the work to demonstrate that from a financial performance point of view, this is increasingly a good thing to do. We know, you mentioned the TCFD, the TNFD, now the TISFD, yeah? Good. So we understand that climate change is financially material, both physical risk and transition risk. We're understanding, but need some help developing the basic tools to measure how biodiversity, plastics, air pollution, and other things are financially material. We are still far away from creating generalizable data and conclusions that show that social inequality is financially material. If you are a hard-headed investor that's open to the idea of social and environmental issues affecting your risk-adjusted return, but you want to see the evidence. That's when we're going to win, is if all finance is sustainable finance, or no finance is sustainable finance, and it's not a little box where people think it's a charismatic asset class that you allocate a tiny percentage of your portfolio to.
So you're saying that there is a very broad pool of capital that wants to invest with purpose or align with some sustainability objective, let's not call them impact, but those managers don't want to take a PhD course on impact measurement and management, and they shouldn't. How do we meet in the middle? And again, I will insist with a cheeky question. Why are you here in Cartagena in Financing Common? Of all places, you could be. I mean, it's a beautiful city, but...
Well, the Bezos Earth Fund has invested heavily in protecting the Amazon. We support the PFP program. We've done a lot of work protecting coastal areas, and so we are very active in this space, and I'm learning from everybody else. But one of the reasons that the themes we're interested in is this theme of what can we do to help public and private capital talk to each other more effectively. we're testing the idea of creating a kind of deal team for the planet, which would be a group of professionals that come from these institutions, public and private, that serve as the kind of investment bankers for nature and climate, whose only job is to help all of these institutions work more effectively together to deploy capital. So those are some of the reasons that, and of course I wanted to meet you because I've heard so much about you, Sebastian.
No, I was so happy to share the panel with you, and I was saying the question because we're all delighted to have you here sharing with us, and everything you brought to this discussion from your previous life was very, very interesting, and I will come back to that. Um, I'm like in my living room chatting with friends, so I lost. I'm the worst moderator on earth, as you will see. We are fine. We are fine. Jorge, Jorge Arbache, you're the vice president for private sector at CAF. Well, you know that because that's your job. You don't need me to tell you that, but I will tell everyone here that we are delighted to have Jorge. You manage a portfolio which is sizable, very sizable, over $4 billion, and you structure instruments and you push financial innovation across instruments. And from what I read, you work in different asset classes and you employ all of different solutions, starting with what Marcos said. It's all about risk and it's about de-risking, and you being from a multilateral, in this case, that works for development, Corporación Andina de Fomento. How does everything that we discussed today resonate with you, and especially you being in the private sector arm of the bank?
Well, first of all, Sebastian and the organizers, thank you for inviting CAF for participating in this very nice conversation. Well, in order not to repeat many things that were already mentioned here, I'd like to put something new on the table, Sebastian, if you allow me. Look, it seems to be clear that we indeed need to invite the private sector to jump in and help us in not only to protect nature, to go through all the environmental challenges, but also to help us with the SDG agenda as well. Having said that, the only way, from my perspective, to get there is by attracting the private sector. There's no other way to do that. Just to put a number on the table, if you add up how much money all the development banks disburse every year in Latin America, it's less than $30 billion. In other words, nothing, if you compare with what is needed. Well, what to do? Attract the private sector. In order to attract the private sector, you can do all those things. De-risking, guarantees, blah, 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 whatever you want. Okay, again, deal. But this is not the thing. The thing is, attract the private sector to do what? That's the key question. As Paul mentioned, in a way or another, indeed, the philanthropics, the sovereign wealth funds, the family offices, all those guys, they want to do money. That's what they are expected to do. And the thing is, can they indeed do money on the environmental agenda, the social agenda, and all those? Yes, I think so. But the question is how. Let's move to the case of Latin America. Latin America, as you all know, this is a very interesting continent, but with a lot of poverty, a lot of inequality, a lot of challenges, and all those things. And we indeed have to do a lot of efforts in order to meet the SDGs and all those things. Okay, fine. And how to attract the private sector to jump in? There are, in this specific case, there is a huge opportunity for making money and getting there. And what the opportunity is? It is related to all those things that are related to the green manufacturing. Green manufacturing. We all know that most of the things that we produce today could be, let's say, labeled gray manufacturing, all those things in our area and northern, they are gray manufacturing because they use gray energy, they do not recycle, they blah, 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 and all those things. But in order to meet the environmental challenges, we have to convert most of what we produce and the way we produce into green manufacturing, right? That's the only way. In order to do that, we need at least three things, three components. The first one, of course, has to do with green energy. Cheap, secure, and available green energy. The number two is a lot of water. A lot of water. And number three, critical minerals. We're talking about nickel, copper, rare earth, high quality iron ore, graphite, and many others. Well, all those three things are readily available in this region, more than in any other region in the world. But on the top of that, this region also has a lot of biomes, the hugest, the biggest rainforest, a lot of bioeconomy, a lot of species, and all those things. And is also one of the key providers of food for the rest of the world. But the key aspect here is related to the three things that I mentioned in the first hand. Water, green energy, and critical minerals. This region is extremely well positioned to attract plants that are desperate to find a way to produce in a competitive way, take into account all the environmental compliance that they are subject to. And also, they are also in need to not only to green energy, but to secure energy. And also, they are looking for places to produce with all the constraints related to geopolitics, and also all the constraints related to the natural disasters that are becoming a very important issue for the geography of plants around the world. You have to diversify. You cannot put all your eggs on the same basket as before. So in other words, you have to combine two things. The first one is efficiency, but not efficiency related to cheap labor cost. Efficiency related to available green energy at a reasonable price. And the second thing is related to resiliency, which has to do with geopolitics and with the distribution of plants related to the natural disasters, the extreme natural disasters. Where to go? Latin America is for sure one of the main addresses for companies that are intensive in energy, in energy. So that combines two extremely important things that we are discussing this table. The first one is related to how to accelerate the decarbonization. The second thing is how to accelerate the SDGs. And why? Because we are talking about plants, big plants, energy intensive, like steel, chemicals, fertilizers, cement, glass, paper and pulp, and others that have a long and huge value chains that are mostly based in cities, where most of the population of this region is based. As you may know, this is the most urbanized region in the world.
And growing.
And growing. That's where the violence is, where the poverty is, where the income distribution is, and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. So if you really want to tackle SDGs, you have to find a way to improve economic activity in the cities in the region, so that you can tackle income informality, as our colleague mentioned about Peru. You can tackle low productivity, which is extremely important thing. You can tackle poverty and inequality. And the way to go includes, it's not limited to, it includes exploring the huge agenda on the green manufacturing.
I like the
We're talking
fact that
about
you,
trillions of dollars, not billions.
I like that you brought us, rightly so, to a sector, to an issue, to an opportunity. Sometimes you go to conferences like this and you can discuss, I don't know, like for 2 hours around a sustainable bond, and you discuss about a means, but it's nothing if you're not talking about the issue you want to resolve. We were approached recently by a bank that shall remain unnamed. We want to issue a sustainable bond. Well, but what do you want to fund? We have no idea. We want to do a sustainable issuance, but it's to fund, I don't know, like gender equality or save water. We'll see. Give us suggestions. We need to be there. So I like that you're bringing this opportunity very, very, in a very nitty-gritty way. And the sub-question I will have to you is, you work in a multilateral CAF, and some of your colleagues that do the classic multilateral, their mission is to, I will say it in an unfair way, to sell credits to governments. But you are in the private sector. How those two sides of the brain of an institution like that work? Because one are funding government activities, and you are looking to work with the private sector. How much do you interact with the other side of CAF? And it happens in all development banks. You have in BID, you have BID, and then BID Invest. And sometimes the guys talk a lot to each other, sometimes they work together, sometimes they struggle. Do you think you're collaborating well, or what would you like to do more with the public sector arm?
Well, look, we can always improve coordination inside our institutions, sovereign and non-sovereign arms. So there's a lot to do there. We can improve, and we can things that we could do more and better is things like supporting urban developments, urban projects that have both components, sovereign and non-sovereign, that could even reduce the cost of that given operation, improve externalities and spillovers and so on and so forth. So this is the way to go, and beyond attracting and mobilizing resources. But let me go back to one thing that we are talking about a lot about impact. That's fine. But there is another word that is even as important or even more important, which is additionality. There's a lot of things that our banks can do. But the right question is, and there's always impact, almost by definition. If you don't do things wrong, you can always get some type of impact, which is fine. But the question that should come first is, are you sure that you are seeing additionality there? This is not a simple question. In many occasions, people may not have the right answer, may not even know if what the answer is. And in most of these occasions, maybe a public development bank may not be the right partner. Maybe, I don't know, a commercial bank or a given fund or whatever. So the combination between impact and additionality, that is the key thing. That's where you should be. And that's when mobilization becomes something greater and even more important. So, and on the top of that, we have to know what to do with the money, and not talking about impact per se as if we're like an entity. It's not an entity. If you are really serious about attracting private money, you have to offer them good opportunities for them to make money. And for that given example about that green manufacturing, we are talking about very microeconomic issues. Micro on the vein. It's micro. So in a way that microeconomics, competitiveness of a given firm is creating solutions for both the environment and for poverty. So everyone this is a win-win-win story. That's the way to go.
And I'm glad that you brought up the issue of urban investments, which the same way with green manufacturing, the market is as big, if you think of it. I mean, there are 120 million Latin Americans living in informal settlements, meaning no water, no electricity, no sewage, out of 600. More than half living in inadequate homes, and construction is responsible for 40% of carbon emissions. And there, the government budgets are sad. I mean, and even with all the operations of the multilaterals, it's part of the 30 billion you were saying. Maria Elvira is doing a very interesting piece of work with stakeholders in Colombia, the Navis, of course, to mobilize private investment into the urban housing and habitat agenda. So it would be great to connect with CAF on that as well. Now, Alan. Hola, Alan. We haven't met Alan either. I've been reading about you, Alan. I'm very happy that you were able to join us. We'll try to close with you. Alan is head of the Latin American network of GFANS, the Global Finance Alliance for Net Zero, and the managing director. But you've been in Mexico's TCFD, you've been the vice president of sustainability at Citibanamex. Probably you weren't able to hear what Marcos was, the 76 acronyms that Marcos mentioned, but I'm sure you know them all. And from what I read about your background, you're in the business of systemic change. And beyond capital mobilization, which you do at GFANS, launched in COP. What you heard from colleagues, how far we are from achieving that systemic change, and what's the role of an investor or an initiative like GFANS that aims to mobilize capital for development?
Great. Thank you all for the invitation, and thank you for having patience with me. I will switch to Spanish too, if you don't mind.
Please.
I think generally I have passed through several changes that affect usually the economy, and I noticed that particularly, I don't know if that happens around the world, but particularly in Latin America, we have an issue with English, so we need to understand everything that we speak. This type of conversations, we need to understand it in Spanish, or or Portuguese, if that's the case. So if you don't mind, I would like to switch to Spanish, because I would like also to send this message in Spanish.
Tienes razón, y súper importante.
Yeah, thank you.
From the GFANS, the truth is that we are just starting. You know, GFANS was created. Can you hear me? Yes. GFANS is created in 2021, and its objective was not only to unify the financial sector, that is promoting and pushing, has it's a mission of net zero. What does this mean? This is a huge challenge. You already mentioned CFD, for example, TCFD, and other initiatives as targets, among others. These initiatives, what they do is that help us to really understand in what situation we're in. What is the risk that we're having as financial institutions, and in some cases as non-financial institutions. But in not all the cases, we are understanding what is the size of the challenge that we are facing, and how can we be able to do that transition to net zero. In some cases, we are just maintaining the objective, but we really don't know what's going to be the strategy and how to implement it. This is where we arrive with GFANS. What we do is that it has a technical team that develops and analyzes methodologies, frameworks, to be able to understand how the transition has to be to a net zero from the point of view of the financial sector, but at the same time on the real economy. So this is relevant because if we do not understand what's happening outside in the real economy, the financials can be simply building castles in the air. We will be building utopias that not necessarily are the reality of what's really happening. Where are we? The reality is that GFANS is understanding that there cannot be no solution, unique solutions for all. One size fits all. It has to be different solutions. So Asia doesn't think the same as America. America doesn't think the same as Africa. each one has its own challenges. And in this sense, G Funds, what it's doing, it's creating networks. Networks in Asia, Pacific Asia, another from Africa. We're launching a Latin American network in this year. And now, what we are seeking is to collaborate with all of you, with each one of you, because we understand each one has a role in the region, and obviously at a global level, but each one has a knowledge built, has a road already that has been through. So each one of you, I insist, has a role. Sometimes the development bank can acquire a higher risk compared to the private. And some of the privates, because we also have the venture capital, that venture capital is one of the partnerships that we have in net zero in G funds. And afterwards, when we're talking about, for example, to work in Latin America, we have to understand that the dialogues will not work. What do I mean by this? We have a huge opportunity, as Jorge mentioned already. We have a huge opportunity to convert Latin America into a provider of solutions of the climate change. How can this be? Simply, it's talking about the things what have to be said and done. In Latin America, our energy matrix is much better compared to other regions. It doesn't mean that it's perfect, and we do have to include much more renewable energy, but we have to understand in not only all Latin America, coal is a problem. I'm sorry. Carbon is a problem. And also, for example, one of the topics that we see that is relevant for all Latin America is deforestation. And also, what we see that is also relevant is the public transportation. But in fact, we have to understand this from the governments, the multilateral banks, NAB chapters, because we have to work with a sense of reality and a sense of impact. We believe that the social topics are very relevant for Latin America. I'm pretty sure it's going to be for other regions, but in Latin America, specifically due to the political timings, it's much more relevant. So if we do not sit and talk about how to create impact, and if in effect the work with the impact investment can complement another large investments that can be done. But this is where G funds is going to fail. If we do not understand that, we cannot be able to do what we want to do. We want to work, we want to be in Latin America. We are here to learn from Latin America and to bring Latin America to G funds, at the global G funds. So I hope I was very precise in my answer. 2 months, only 2 months. But you already mentioned this. A lot of the work that I've been doing is the change that we have to do, a systemic change. And the challenge is huge. This is a region with a lot of countries, very different cultures. In the Caribbean, for example, many colleagues have already mentioned this. The Caribbean feel closer to Africa compared to Latin America. So we are working in the region, but we have to understand how the region has to solve its own problems. Eventually, what we want to do is to create chapters by country that can support in the work that is being done by other entities, but that at the same time can help to acquire other commitments in transition plans for the financial institutions, for the real economy, obviously, because if we don't have the real economy, well, the financials will not be able to do what we want to do around these topics. And we also seek to be a representative of these entities that today we have more than 650 and more than 130 billion assets. So we want to be a representative to help, to negotiate, and eventually to close the gaps that can be in the path of the investment. Thank you so much. Excellent. You're in Mexico? Yes, I'm in Mexico. These are all friends. We're all friends. We still have 1 minute for one final question from the public. Maybe a claim, a question, a comment. There was somebody who wanted to ask a question, make a comment. Left? Is asleep?
No, I just wanted to thank each and every one of you for joining this panel. I think it has been a really fruitful conversation, and I think that one key takeaway from this space is that we definitely have to work together. We have to cut out all the red tape. We have to figure out new ways, innovative ways, disruptive ways to take action. And this sounds very simple, but we have to really do it, and really do it now. So thank you very much to everyone here and everyone that attended our panel. And I don't know if the person who was supposed to say something is here now or left forever. I think they left. Marco, of course.
I want to pick up one thing that Paul said when he said that all finance needs to be sustainable, or no finance is sustainable. I go back to the point that I had this conversation with Sebastian and with Ronnie before, which has to do with the box, the small box that you mentioned, Paul. The truth is, every investment has an impact. Back to the conversation of the thing, every investment has an impact. Not always that impact is positive. Not always that impact matters to the transition, to decarbonization, to the SDGs. But I completely concur with Paul that this notion that only a little bit of corner of whatever has an impact, not only doesn't help, but it misses the point. Every investment has an impact. The job of everybody here is to make sure that the negative impact of any investment is minimized, and the positive impact of every investment is maximized. That sounds easy. Not that easy to make it, but that's the equation we need to fight for.
I will put that the negative impact is minimized and the positive impact is maximized. I will make a T-shirt with that, and I will wear it the rest of the year. And I will take that reflection as your final reflection, and you inspired us to share a quick round. Henry, what do you take out of this session?
That we need to change how we work, right? And from our end, we don't want to get, while we have to measure impact, but we can't get carried away measuring impact while we're dying. That's how we see it.
Another phrase for a teacher: we cannot get carried away by measuring impact while we're dying.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the sense of urgency. Jorge?
Well, perhaps two things. I think that we have to be very pragmatic, and two, we can indeed combine poverty reduction and protection of the environment.
The green and the social. Maria Elvira, you already closed us. Amy, ¿qué te llevas de esta discusión?
Creo, a ver, dos temas.
There's two things, two takeaways. I think it's very inspiring to see that within the group, people with different backgrounds and experiences, working in different organizations, we have impact investments. We have it so much in our minds, and how this can help us achieve the SDGs, which for us at COFIDE is of utmost importance. And second, which is always in my top of mind, is measure, measure, measure. For me, this is the most important thing in terms of impact.
First of all, I hope you don't regret having come after this session, that you stay for the amazing program we have ahead. And what do you take out of today's discussion?
Well, first I need to visit Belize. And I would echo what Henry said a different way. President Ruto of Kenya put it, we can't be choosing between the end of the month and the end of the world.
Oh. Amazing. Alan?
I would highlight again that we invite you all to seize the opportunity that climate change brings us right now in Latin America, and don't be afraid. Africa is thinking the same. Asia is thinking the same. So we are on a run. So, and this is an amazing opportunity again for new markets, for new opportunities, for new social benefits, and to avoid poverty. So.
Thank you all for the very concrete and very actionable calls to action. Thank you all for sharing, for joining. Gracias a todos. All of you will stay for a picture, and the rest can continue enjoying the program, and we see you later at the Events and Fix. And please do engage one-to-one with all these wonderful leaders throughout the week.
Bubble power is my gun. Blowing bubbles so they reach the sun. But maybe, maybe, maybe they'll pop in front of my eyes. Yeah, maybe, maybe, maybe they will not realize that in my head hidden wishes I sent to the sky. But maybe, maybe, maybe they'll pop in front of my eyes. Blowing bubble guns with friends. Blowing bubble guns with them. Bubble power is my gun. Blowing bubbles so they reach the sun. Maybe, maybe, maybe they'll pop in front of my eyes. Yeah, maybe, maybe, maybe they will not realize that in my head hidden wishes I sent to the sky. But maybe, maybe, maybe they'll pop in front of my eyes. Am I someone's bubble? Do I carry wishes in the air? Why am I so empty? Why am I so alone? Blowing bubble gums with friends. Blowing bubble gums with them. Bubble power is my gun. Blowing bubbles so they